Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining the first of a series of dialogues hosted by the UN Trust Fund on resourcing ending violence against women and girls programs globally, listening and learning from civil society organizations. Next slide, please. My name is Mildred Garcia Rodriguez. I am the Capacity Development and Grants Operational Manager at the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women. We're going to discuss some logistics now before we start. All participants who are joining are on mute to avoid audio issues during the presentation portion of the meeting. Please feel free to use the chat function to send throughout comments and questions. Please be also advised that this meeting is being recorded and will be made available for a wider audience later on. And our colleagues have also started up live tweeting now about our event. You can find us on Twitter at UN Trust Fund EVO. Okay, so let's get started. Most of us know the UN Trust Fund already. We are a UN interagency grant-making mechanism managed by the UN Women on behalf of the UN system. And it is the only interagency grant-making mechanism dedicated to eradicate all forms of violence against women and girls. We are proud partners and supporters of many civil society organizations, especially women's rights organizations who are engaged in this work, many of whom are already in this call today. So thank you so much for joining us today. Next slide. As a donor, our approach is deeply informed by the voices and experiences of our grantee partners across the globe. Their insights challenge us to rethink and innovate how we operate and resource this work. Through their feedback, we understand that our role goes beyond just funding. It is about building ecosystems that sustain and amplify the impact of this work. What we hear from the grantee partners can be broadly divided into 4 buckets that you see in front of you: resourcing, intersectionality, resilience, feminist knowledge, and movement. By focusing on these, we are not just funding programs. We are investing in transformative change that addresses the root causes of violence and empowered us at the forefront of this fight. In July, we launched our webinar series with a focus of resourcing intersectionality. We were joined by partners from civil society organizations and experts from around the world who work on ending violence against women and girls, particularly those with disabilities and those in humanitarian contexts. The discussion yielded several important calls to action for donors on resourcing intersectionality that I would like to highlight, especially if you missed the previous dialogue. First, that intersectionality resourcing is complex and takes time and intensive time, but it can elevate EVO programs from mere integration of underserved women and girls to true inclusion. Second, intersectional resourcing can foster innovative, multi-sectorial partnerships to end violence against women and girls. And finally, deepest forms of intersectional resourcing addresses the structural inequalities that are the root cause of marginalization of women and girls. Today's conversation is our second bucket, which is on resourcing for organizational resilience. And we have a wonderful group of panelists and speakers who will introduce shortly in 5 minutes. And together we are hoping to answer one key question: what resilience means for organizations of various scales and strategies for resourcing organizational effectively, including funding models, capacity development approaches, and partnerships necessary to enhance women's rights and civil society organizations to address violence against women. Next slide. But before handling to our panelists, I want to share a little bit about how the Trust Fund has committed to ensuring sustainability and organizational resilience, which is one of our 4 grant-making principles in our current strategic plan. These directions was informed by our grantees partners, especially throughout the global COVID-19 pandemic, when the UN Trust Fund put in place additional measures to further support organizational resilience, including by funding general and operational costs, and by also being more flexible with regards to budget utilization. Especially this meant that we introduced core funding. We also introduced self-care funding provided to small grants organizations, and our additional funding under the Spotlight initiative to existing grantees in Sub-Saharan Africa in 2020, with a primary focus on support for the institutional strengthening, risk mitigation, and recovery in the context of COVID-19. We have constantly been listening and learning from our partners through our first of a kind global dialogue on organizational resilience in 2023, with a particular focus on practice-based knowledge of civil society and women's rights organizations working to end violence against women and girls. I'm sure many of you who are now on this call were part of this dialogue in our platform, Shine. We also invested in documenting the key lessons emerging from its small portfolio of organizations since 2016. We have an exciting agenda today and some wonderful speakers. Grantees organizations who have been part of this journey, researchers who have helped us document these lessons, and donors and UN agencies who have all been at the forefront of this work and have lots to say about intersectionality and our resourcing EVO programs. I would like to introduce our wonderful panelists. Gemma Wood is an independent consultant specializing in strategic planning, knowledge management, and research focused on gender equality and ending violence against women and girls. She is currently engaged by the UN Trust Fund to investigate practice-based knowledge of the organizational resilience of civil society organizations on working on ending violence against women and girls. Chinier Ejoy is the founder and executive director of Sexual Offense Awareness and Responsive Initiative, SOAR, a nonprofit she started in her home country, Nigeria. She leads efforts at SOAR to strengthen child protection structure, addressing social cultural norms, perpetrating sexual violence at grassroots levels and in community affected by conflict. Bielt Parkhomenko is the chair of NGO Club ENI at the UN Trust Fund grantee partner in Ukraine. Bielta is a seasoned advocate and has been instrumental in designing and implementing programs that empower key communities, particularly people who use drugs, with a focus on women in Ukraine. Radhika Vishnananta, an independent development researcher and communication specialist based in Bangalore, India. Radhika is also the producer of the UN Trust Fund 2 postcard series, Pathway to Prevention and Small and Mighty, the latter of which focus on the impact of small organizations in EVO work. And finally, Cynthia Yakuse, co-vice president of the global program at the Equality Fund. She has over 25 years of experience in human rights, women's rights, sexual and reproductive health, and rights and governance and accountability. I am personally very excited about our panel today and just want to take a second to thank you all for taking the time to share your knowledge and your experience with us. We will ask each of them 2 rounds of questions and then open up for questions and answers. With that, I turn to our first panelist, Gemma, who supported us, documented the insights of our partners about organizational resilience. Welcome, Gemma. Your recent paper on organizational resilience co-created a framework that can be useful for donors to support organizations working on ending violence against women and girls. Could you provide us with an overview on some of the key findings from the paper, especially the elements that practitioners have highlighted as key for their resilience? And the second question, how does this vary depending on the size, region, and context of the organizations? Thank you, Gemma, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Mildred, and I hope you can all hear me. It's good.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here and to see so many people online and to see so many esteemed panelists ahead of me who will speak from their perspective. As Mildred said, I'll share some findings from the study. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge all the civil society organizations and women's rights organizations who took part in this study on organizational resilience. We had 37 active participants representing 37 organizations around the globe, every region, who took part in focus group discussions online and Shine, the online knowledge platform hosted by UN Trust Fund. In addition to these 37, I want to acknowledge that we've been inspired by over many years by feminists who have been raising the issue and the importance of resilience. Feminist funds like the Africa Women's Development Fund and grantees and organizations that you'll hear from today have inspired us in this process. So what is organizational resilience? Moving to the next slide. Organizational resilience became a bit of a buzzword during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's been mentioned in regard to the importance of people and organizations being able to be resilient to crises. But the risk and emerging criticisms that have come, particularly from feminists, have said that this can sometimes be dehumanizing and really raising expectations that people and organizations should cope through any crisis. And yet these crises are often caused by other people, by other organizations, and by other actors around the world. So they're trying to be resilient in this field of compounded challenges and crises that really rest on the imbalance of power dynamics. When we asked these organizations in the study, is organizational resilience relevant to you? There was a resounding yes. So although there's a risk of it being a buzzword, it did resonate. Sometimes different words were used, but undoubtedly the organizations that work every day to end violence against women are struggling with a range of internal and external crisis. They're not only the protracted and global crisis, but the everyday challenges, from how to care to their own staff and deal with funding crisis internally, to how to deal with the economic climate in their country. And compounded within this is the ecosystem in which they work, of the context of oppression and discrimination, an ongoing entrenched gender inequality in which they work. So resilience is relevant. Moving to the next slide. So within this context of ongoing crises, whether internal and external, and challenges, we asked, well, what does organizational resilience look like to you? How could it be defined? And we received a variety of definitions. So to partly answer your second question, Mildred, there were differences by different regions and types of organization, but so many commonalities. And the commonalities can be seen in this quote. Resilience is seen as the ability to anticipate, prepare for, respond, and adapt to these crises and challenges, but also to learn, this feeling of being able to thrive, to take opportunities and to innovate, all while remaining dedicated to their feminist organizational vision and mission and the long-term goal of ending violence against women. And we saw explanations that really centered organizational resilience within feminist and women's movement building, that it is a key part. And this resonates with other work by the UN Trust Fund on feminist movements and organizational power. We then asked the participants, what characterizes organizational resilience? What are the key attributes? 5 key themes arose. The people and community. So that means obviously the activists within an organization are key. They have to be secure and healthy and safe, and they work closely with the community. Secondly, their networks and partners are vital because we do not work in a silo. We rely on our allies, our stakeholders, our partners, and we rely on networking. Strategies and systems are the bedrock of any organization, from robust governance systems to financial management to the whole strategic plan and long-term visioning for an organization. Finances and resources are absolutely key. You need money, and the money needs to be flexible, unearmarked, and core. And finally, underlying all of this is the fundamental commitment these organizations have to their mission and their vision and values, which are solidly within the feminist movement world. Moving to the next slide. I won't go into these in detail, but we asked them what the characteristics are of organizational resilience, and I've mentioned a few. And underlying all of these was this feminist attributes to organizational development. So where organizational resilience advances us is it takes traditional organizational development and layers it with feminist attributes of caring for each other, of making sure people aren't working for free, of caring for each other's mental health, and ensuring the sustainability and adaptability for the long term. So what does that mean for the rest of the ecosystem, for donors, for the UN Trust Fund? We asked civil society involved in the study what messages would they have for donors, and we'll be exploring this later in the panel. But I wanted to highlight that women's rights organizations and civil society can only be resilient if they're enabled and not disenabled from those around them. We heard that donors, policymakers, decision makers, and other stakeholders can help enable resilience as long as there's funding, long-term commitment, collaborative partnerships, attention to addressing the root causes of violence against women, and listening and learning from women's rights organizations and putting them in the leadership role. By enabling civil society, they can play their key role in gender equality and ending violence against women and sustaining women's and feminist movements. To conclude, the study really was a call to action to the whole system, particularly donors, grant makers, and decision makers. Civil society are often holding space and filling gaps in state service delivery. They cannot do this, and they cannot meet the needs of survivors, and they cannot meet the needs of their own staff without support for these facets of organizational resilience. And now we'll hear from the practitioners themselves about how they see organizational resilience from their perspective. Thank you, Mildred.
Thank you, Gemma, for your presentation. This reflection underscores a vital call for action, right? Investing in resilience is more than just keeping organizations operational. It is about empowering them to sustain their crucial work and drive significant and transformative change. My colleagues will drop a link in the chat to this paper on organizational resilience, and we really invite you all to take a look of that paper. Now I will turn back to Chinyere Ejoy from SOAR. And Chineri, SOAR's ongoing effort to ensure inclusivity and build movements to end violence against women and girls are an inspiration to us. Could you tell us how investing in organizational resilience may have supported the building of movement to ending violence against women and girls? Over to you. You're muted, Sinead.
Okay, yes, so I've unmuted now. Can we hear me?
Yes, perfect, thank you. Over to you.
Yeah, okay, so great to be here. Great to be here again. Great to see so many people logged on. Yes, so let me start by saying that we have been funded by the UN Trust Fund to end violence against women for about in 2 cycles now. And I can say that we started as an organization, new women-led, survival-led organization with a ton of passion and a large heart to make a difference, but really didn't have access, almost zero access to institutional funding until 2017, when the UN Trust Fund supported us for the first time. And I can say that we have grown from that point, from that lone voice, small organization, to who we are right now, working across the northern region in Nigeria, providing support to girls in grassroots communities and in communities affected by conflict. How has investment in our resilience, how has it looked like for us? So I can say first and foremost, long-term, flexible core funding. So the UN Trust Fund have supported our work to implement, homegrown strategies that reflect the challenges and the needs of the communities that we serve, rather than predetermined strategies, and activities that they would want us, to go ahead and fund. And really, I believe that this is because local organizations are deeply connected with the communities that they serve, and they understand the needs and what it takes to bring about desired change. Now, the funding that was given to us was not 1 year, for about two different size cycles, was not just long-term in terms of multiple year, but it was also flexible, that allowed us adapt our programming, to meet the issues that we found on ground. So it wasn't rigid, and so it allowed us also take up core costs that has allowed our organization blossom. Not just costs that are tied to projects, but costs that are tied and are crucial to our organization's continued existence. I'm talking about costs like, admin costs, rent, power, electricity, including, expanding our financial processes. And I can say proudly now, because of the long-term, flexible, and core funding that we have received, we were able to go through the process of developing a strategic plan, which was what we did not have as an organization before the UN Trust Fund came on board. So we are stronger, we understand what it is we want to do. We have our vision, we have our mission, and this has really given us visibility as an organization, has given us visibility and has provided linkages. The UN Trust Fund had starting out as an organization that really didn't have access to other funders. Right now, because of the support that we have gotten, not just to run our projects, to provide support and help communities address issues of sexual and gender-based violence, but it has helped us as an organization develop the visibility, the voice, and stronger programming that has enabled us now have a seat at the table with the government and other partners when it comes to addressing issues of sexual and gender-based violence in the northern region and in Nigeria as a whole, where we find ourselves. Now, as a result of this long-term flexible funding that we have gotten, we are now better as an organization, we are now stronger. We were given the opportunity to test our strategies. Please remember that when UN Trust Fund started funding us, we really did have a lot of experience in terms of programming for communities. But I believe through the processes that they have in place, they were able to identify that we have what it takes, and they believed in us. So just believing in the products that we were providing, and they supported us. We've been able to program now for about 6 years in grassroots communities. And so we have become the go-to organization in the city, in the state where we are now, regarding community mobilization and working with community leaders. As I said, has given us a voice, has made us more sustainable. For our systems, our strategies, our staffing, this is really something we have not seen in any other funding that we have received before. So because we are stronger now, we've been able to access other funding from other organizations. But that unique element in the UN Trust Fund I would say, will be the staff care. So it's really gladdening to know that the UN Trust Fund is not just interested in having successful activities, successful results, but it's also important that we invest in the staff that implement these activities, especially in the sector we find ourselves, addressing issues of sexual and gender-based violence. There are possibilities of vicarious trauma, working with survivors, having to listen to all of this, and it can be really exhausting working in hard to reach communities. And so it was gladdening to know that there was a provision for staff, which really also enabled us unwind. As a result of that self-care course, we're able to develop a policy around staff care, around staff well-being. And so we are able to implement that and help staff access counseling, help staff, just down tools, as much as they can, to revive themselves so that they can be better off for the communities, that we serve. So really, I would say that kudos to the UN Trust Fund, for how they have supported us as an organization, grown from where we are, to the point where we can now stand and hold our onion, speak, in communities. We are being approached, as experts in the field. The government, the state governments are calling on us. And I just look back at where we are coming from. And honestly, we couldn't have been here without the support that we have gotten from the UN Trust Fund. Better implementation, stronger organizations, improved visibility, and improved capacity to advocate for the needs of the young girls that we work in the grassroots communities and communities affected by conflicts.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What an inspiration to us. Thank you so much, Shinir, for your presentation. We clearly hear that by investing in resilience, organizations can co-create solutions with their communities, leading to more impactful and sustainable interventions. And the pathways are clear. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Investing on strengthening staff, systems, and structure is key, which helps organizations to adapt during crisis and avoid burnout. What an inspiration. Thank you. Now to Bielta. Hi, Bielta. The war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Welcome. So the war in Ukraine has and continues to have an impact on your organization and projects. Could you tell us about how you continue to take care of your staff individually and collectively, and build the resilience of your organizations in difficult contexts? How can donors better support the well-being of project staff? Bielta, over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yelta, and I'm the chair of NGO Klobune. It's a community-led organization that has been serving the needs of key communities in Ukraine for 24 years. Klobune was founded in 1993 by a group of people who use drugs with the mission of implementing the ideas and experiences of our communities to improve lives. We focus particularly on the rights of people who use drugs with special focus to women. And over the years, our organization has grown and matured, and today we provide services across 16 regions of Ukraine, reaching approximately 3,000 people every month. The war in Ukraine has brought unprecedented challenges, but it has also highlighted the resilience of community-led organizations like ours. We have had go beyond our traditional programming to distribute emergency humanitarian aid, leveraging our extensive community networks to support those most in need during this crisis. This ability to adapt and respond quickly is a testament to the strength and flexibility that comes from being a community-led organization. One of the key factors in our resilience is our staff. Our team is not just a workforce, we are as a family. The people who work at Klobune are part of the key communities we serve, and they are our most valuable resource. However, working in such challenging environments, especially during times of crisis, times of war, carries a high risk of burnout. And our staff members often struggle with self-care as they are deeply committed to their work and the people they serve. To support our staff, we have implemented several initiatives. First and foremost, we provide access to psychological support. Every staff member has the opportunity to receive therapy, which is crucial for maintain mental health in such stressful times. We also organize regular supervision sessions where staff can share experience, offer mental support, and address complex situations together. We believe in the importance of the we believe in the importance of bonding and team building activities to prevent burnout. Just last week, our entire team gathered by the river in a pine forest for a day of games and relaxation. And these moments of connection and joy are powerful tools for resilience. Additionally, additionally strive to create a comfortable working environment. For those working on the streets, we provide warm clothes, portable chargers, and flexible work schedules. In our office, you can find soft toys, snacks, and stress relief tools to help create a supportive atmosphere. We also focus on the personal development of our staff. We offer training opportunities and are currently seeking funding to provide English language courses, soft skills, communication training, and social marketing education. While we're working hard to support our team, there are still areas where we need help. For example, we would like to offer health insurance to our staff, but we currently lack the resources to do so. I talk about the importance of developing together a clear strategic vision for the organization. It is critical that the members of the community-led organization participate in setting of the strategy and share the common individual vision. Community-led organizations grow and mature over time. They are founded on the community solidarity and the family spirit of our members. Sustaining and developing a community network for over 2 decades secures deep levels of privileged access and community wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Vieta. We hear you clearly that donors are encouraged to not only offer financial support, but also understand the specific challenge faced by grassroots organizations. Investing in staff well-being is essential for sustaining the effectiveness and resilience of these organizations during difficult time. So thank you so much for sharing your experience. And now we'll hear from Radhika. Hello, Radhika, welcome. Based on your experience and insights shared in the podcast series on small grants, what are some of the key challenges and opportunities faced by small organizations in accessing and managing funding? Over to you, Radhika.
Thank you so much, Mildred, and I am so glad to be here amongst all of you. It was an absolute wonderful experience working on the Small and Mighty podcast. So I'm going to just begin by quickly introducing the idea behind the series. As we all know, all these organizations, the small organizations, play a very crucial role. And yet, despite their very vital work, they tend to be underfunded and their impact is under-recognized. So I'm going to start by playing a very short clip from the trailer of the 5-part series that will give you just a brief glimpse into what it sounds like. Nearly 1 in 3 women and adolescent girls experience some form of physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. Only 40% reach out for any help, and only 1 in 10 survivors approach the police.
Support for housing, support for employment,
specialized free legal aid and psychological support services,
support for education.
There are very few organizations which are able to interpret and also ensure access to services for this particular vulnerable population.
I think our strength is in our community.
The project that I've been working on is because of trying to heal myself through helping others, women with disabilities.
It's a huge task done in the most meager of circumstances, and yet without these organizations, millions of women across the world would be left behind.
We do not have money. We are just a small organization, but our impact is big enough.
So that's just a small glimpse into the trailer of Small and Mighty. It is a 5-part series, if we can go to the next slide. And it's available on all major podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, or you just have to search for Small and Mighty or the UN Trust Fund. And each of the 5 episodes offers us a glimpse into the working of these organizations. So it's to hear the stories of these organizations in their own voices, how they grew, how they navigate the sector, and how they mobilize to change lives with meager resources. The first episode, An Insider to Grassroots Organizations, really gives us a glimpse into how they work to achieve a very, very high impact. The second episode, Limited Resources and Transformative Impact, focuses on the idea of resilience and what it means to a small organization. The third episode is around the theme and on the importance of community. The fourth is what it is like for these small organizations to work in crisis settings, so from humanitarian crises to COVID-19 to conflict. And finally, the 5th episode, which is called Put Your Own Oxygen Mask On First Before You Help Others, really explores what well-being and self-care is and how that is important to small organizations when it comes to their organizational resilience. And across the five episodes, we heard voices from Albania, a number of countries: Albania, Argentina, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Kenya, Indonesia, Malaysia, Mongolia, the Philippines, Ukraine, and Yemen, and of course, with reflections from the UN Trust Fund. And really, the process that we followed in making this series was to have a lot of open-ended conversations with all of these organizations to create a safe space to reflect and share collectively. And the series really offered a deep insight into the reality of these organizations and highlighting what I would call a deep contrast between the impact of the work they do as against the challenges that they have to navigate on a daily basis. Because as we heard just now, and we all know, these organizations constantly navigate through precarity, whether it's financial or human resources or material, and this results in an unpredictability around their operations. And it really becomes essential for them to have strategies in place for organizational resilience. And across the series, we were able to hear experiences from different organizations on some of these challenges and what they what they are really like on the ground. And so some of them, I'm just going to give you a quick run through, is sort of donor and programmatic challenges, because on the ground we heard a lot of experiences of how challenging it is to match donor expectations to the requirements on the ground, often limitations to programmatic funding that can result in prioritizing certain aspects of the work against others. But as we all know, that the work has to continue alongside to operational challenges. How do you ensure that the mission of the organization remains unaffected when the daily experience of running a small organization brings up a new challenge every day? So you'll hear about how organizations navigate through payroll, cash flow, health and safety, managing overheads, the simple but challenging things like ensuring that rent, electricity is paid, the internet connection is working, travel costs are met. And then finally, to managing human resources, which is a very, very important part of this work. Small organizations invest a great amount in staffing, but often also face high attrition and high turnover. And so how do you ensure that the work continues while dealing with all these challenges? And finally, of course, mental health and well-being and self-care. But these organizations on the outside work to outsized goals, very ambitious goals. And if we can go to the next slide, one of the respondents, I want to share a quote from them on how, despite all of these challenges internally, they are perceived to be much larger than they actually are because of the impact of the scale and their work. And so one respondent shared that our colleagues from other organizations think of us as a huge organization, like a really huge organization that has resources in the sense of staff with different backgrounds and programs that are visible and very visible. And we have strong strategic partnerships with different institutions. And that really is kind of a testament to their ability to continue doing the work despite facing all these challenges, because they have been able to find ways to be resilient. And what these organizations shared is that what has helped them become more resilient is firstly trust. When they're able to work in an environment of trust with their donors and other partners, when they have access to flexible funding, and finally, when they work in an environment where they're supported for the long term, because a long-term commitment helps build pathways for sustainability. To the next slide, I want to just end with another quote from another participant who shared what their idea of sustainability and in some sense resilience is in the long run. And I think it's very simple. It's to be able to continue doing the work. And they sort of shared that our vision is not just to stay at service delivery, but also evidence-based programming, so that we can be at the cutting edge for our women and also pave the way for women to be able to break those barriers by being able to effectively deliver programming that is really effective in the field. So I would encourage all of you to go and listen to this series. It's very insightful, and I think we can learn a lot from the experience of all of these many wonderful organizations. And with that, thank you.
Thank you, Radhika. These insights emphasize that despite their small size, right, these organizations have a substantial impact, transforming lives, influencing policies, and providing vital support to survivors of violence. And their resilience and deep community connections underscore the need to sustain a flexible donor partnership, as you mentioned, to enhance their effectiveness and sustainability. Thank you so much for leading this work. And please, I really invite my colleagues to drop a link in the chat to the series of papers on small grants and to our podcast, Small and Mighty, where you can listen to the voices of our grantee partners from different parts of the world. Finally, we welcome Cynthia from the Equality Fund. Hello, Cynthia.
Hi, Mildred.
So Equality Fund has been investing in grant-making approaches focused on the ecosystem of women's rights, feminist organizations and movements, and enabling organizations to become stronger and more resilient over time. Can you please share with us some of your reflections on this journey? Thank you, Cynthia.
Sure. Thank you, Mildred, and thank you for inviting me. I mean, I'd first like to just say how much I appreciated the interventions from the colleagues that just spoke, from Gemma, your framing, Chinere, the wonderful story you told of being a grassroots organization, a brand new emerging organization, and what it meant, one, to be trusted, get the resources, and the evolution of your organization is just truly inspiring, and it speaks to the kinds of organizations that we have been supporting as Equality Fund. So Equality Fund, we're actually quite new as at Equality Fund. We've existed for 40 years as the Match Foundation, but we really came into creation largely because of the support that we got from the feminist movements ecosystem, of which we are a peer. You know, when we say we're a feminist fund, we have peers, over 40 feminist funds around the world, and they were really, their support was crucial to our existing as Equality Fund. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I'd like to engage a little bit with the framework that Gemma shared with us at the start of this webinar, and sort of talk through our work at Equality Fund using some of the, at least perhaps 4 or so of the pillars, and if the time permitting, just share, I think, some of the lessons that we've learned. So, you know, people and community is crucial to us. I spoke about us as belonging to the feminist movement's ecosystem, and in particular the feminist funds. In the work that we do, people and community is critical. The funding that we do at Equality Fund, we first and foremost prioritize self-led organizations. The most proximate to the work, the most proximate to the issues are those that we prioritize. We, of course, look very closely at alignment in terms of feminist values. We do not have you know, sort of a predetermined definition of feminism, of feminists. We understand that there are varying definitions, and so we're quite flexible on that front. But of course, alignment to feminist values and principles, as articulated by those self-led, by those proximate organizations, are very important to us. And then, of course, the finances. No, our raison d'être as the Equality Fund is to resource feminist organizations and movements, to resource as robustly as possible, to resource as long-term as possible. And you know, finally, this idea of sort of networks and partnerships, both from the ecosystem, but also what we hear so much from the organizations that we are supporting, that we are in conversations with. There's been there's a lot of sense of kind of isolation. I think many organizations, we hear certainly many organizations feeling that they may be the only ones facing a particular situation or undergoing a particular experience. And so this notion of kind of networking and bringing the range of organizations together in community is very critical. So very concretely, how have we been doing this as the Equality Fund? Mildred, you mentioned that we have an ecosystem approach to our grant making. So we have 4 streams of grant making. We are issue agnostic. Our streams are structured around how we as feminist movements are structured. We have individual organizations. That is one of our streams called Catalyze. And we have about 80 or so grantee partners within that stream. We also, one of our core partners that does grant making on that in the African continent as Equality Fund, we do not fund individual organizations in Africa. Our core partner there is the African Women's Development Fund, which has going on 25 or so years of experience on the continent of doing grant making. So that is our core partner. They do all the grant making based on their strategies, etc. But the first is individual organizations, from the very grassroots to mid-size to larger organizations around the world. Our second stream is to feminist funds. And those are our peer funds. And we have a really exciting way of engaging with them, which is a non-competitive way of grant making that was really pioneered through the ecosystem, through the community of feminist funds, where funds were invited to look at themselves organizationally, the individual organization and needs within the context of the ecosystem, the community of feminist funds. We have done 2 rounds of what we call Step Up, Step Back. And over the course of those 2 rounds, we have succeeded in supporting all the eligible feminist funds, because we do have some eligibility requirements, given that our funding is, we were really seeded as part of the Canadian Feminist International Affairs policy, with a wonderful $300 million investment from the Canadian government that we are using, that we are, you know, I would say stewarding. I like to use the language of stewarding because these are resources, these are public resources that we are stewarding, and that we're doing that very much in community. Our third stream is networks, coalitions, consortia, which we know is a critical way that we organize as feminist movements, and is one of the most difficult to resource is something that we have heard over and over and over again. I think for us, the exciting thing one of the exciting projects or missions of the Equality Fund is to make what has traditionally been one of the hardest resources to make accessible and available to women's rights and feminist organizations in as flexible and as long-term a way as possible, which is public funding, bilateral funding, government funding. And so because that is our core resource, we have been really intentional about how we make that money as flexible as possible, as least burdensome as possible. So you will see my title that I'm a co-vice president. I lead on working with the team around strategy. What are the directions that we need to be taking? How are we being informed by the movements, etc., in the work? But my co-VP plays a really critical role. Her focus is on the operational aspect of our work. How do we make the money as least burdensome as possible? If we as Equality Fund are not able to fund grassroots organizations, emerging organizations, how do we work in community with the ecosystem of our peer, sister, and other feminist funds to ensure that we can spread the resources as widely and as deeply as possible? So that is sort of broadly. We do have a fourth stream, which is recognizing the crisis-ridden world, the compounded crises, the fact that the impact that crises have on women and girls and gender nonconforming folk, but also the role that feminist and women's rights organizations play in addressing crises with minimal to no resourcing. We heard some really good examples from our colleague, our panelists from Ukraine to that effect. But we see this really around the world. So we did want to pay particular attention to crises and how we can support women's rights and feminist organizations working in and responding to crisis. But we also have an advocacy agenda of pushing to unlock the billions of dollars that are in the humanitarian sector, unlocking them for to be able to support women's rights and feminist organizations. We have, in terms of what the impact that we are hearing from the organizations and from the communities that we support is the flexibility of the funding. When we say flexible, what we mean is we do not have a particular budget template. So for the catalyzed organizations, whatever your mission is, whatever work you want to do, if you want to send us a budget that is just staff, then that is the budget that we fund. There are many organizations that are so used to doing only project type budgets. And so we receive a lot of project type budgets, and we're often in conversations saying, this is flexible. If you need to change it, just let us know. It is flexible funding. Use it as you need. Use it to pivot if you need to. Use it if a crisis surfaces, if there's an emerging crisis. It is flexible for you to adjust and adapt. And indeed, over the course of the really only been doing grant making for about 3 years or so now, but we are hearing organizations and grantee partners that are saying they are now finally able to move from a purely volunteer-based work to actually getting some staff, and the implication of that. We are hearing how the flexible funding has enabled them to secure a venue, a space for them to actually do their work, the stability that has been providing for them. We have many examples of organizations that have been able to use the flexible funding to pivot, to adapt the work that they are doing to the context that is happening. Oftentimes it is crisis related, but in other instances it may be about taking advantage of a particular opportunity that may arise. I would say the final thing, we don't talk about ourselves as building capacity. We really see ourselves as doing the work of accompanying our grantee partners. We recognize that in many instances, particularly within the feminist fund ecosystem, we have as much to learn as the organizations that we are funding. So they're very much a peer, it's kind of very much a peer exercise. We built a lot of our systems with the support of the other feminist funds, whether it's Global Fund for Women, whether it's Mama Cash, whether it's African Women's Development Fund. They were instrumental to us in terms of how we built our own capacity. So accompaniment is key, and accompaniment particularly as it relates to the networking, recognizing that, again, organizations feeling isolated. Issues are interconnected. They're interconnected You could use the language of intersectionality that we've heard about. There's an element of intersectionality. There are trends. There are what is happening across the globe. There are transnational trends, and there's a real desire and hunger to be in community, both for networking, but also really importantly for strategizing to meet the moment that we're in. And so we are very committed to ensuring that we are supporting those kinds of spaces, whether it's through supporting certain convenings or whether it's ourselves bringing together grantee partners, for example, in a region. So again, if you're saying the ecosystem, in a particular region, we may be supporting a number of individual organizations. There may be a number of feminist funds also within that region. And so the opportunities is really exciting things that happen when we bring together within a region from an ecosystem perspective, the networking that enables. I think I'll leave it for that because I know we want to make sure that we have time for questions, and I think there'll be
Thank you.
another question at the end.
Thank you, Cynthia. What insightful inputs, and wonderful to learn about the synergies which validate this learning journey and as an ecosystem. So thank you so much for sharing your experience also in Equality Fund. We have maybe 1 minute for all our panelists to respond to the following questions, which I think is going to be very excited. Please share with us one recommendation to make to donors on building the resilience and preparedness of organizations, especially for small grassroots organizations. What would it be? So let's start with you, Gemma. 1 minute.
I think we've heard it quite often, but flexible funding, fully flexible. I love the example Cynthia gave of just don't have a budget template. Trust the grantees, trust the civil society to be able to spend the money that they know wisely so they can spend it focused on their mission and serving the people and the community and the survivors of violence. Thank you, Mildred.
Thank you. Chinjere, 1 minute. Please share your recommendation. You're muted.
Okay, so I agree, flexible, long-term core funding, but there must be deliberate, intentional funding for small local organizations so they do not have to compete with the larger and more established organizations. Yeah, so that's it for me.
Great, thank you. Bielta, we want to hear your recommendation as well.
Yeah, to all donors and partners, I would say this: supporting the well-being of our staff is not just about providing funds. It's about understanding the unique challenges we face and helping us build a sustainable and resilient organization. By investing in the people who drive these projects, you are ensuring that our communities can continue to thrive even in the most difficult of times.
Thank you. Radhika.
Thank you. I mean, I think I echo what everyone so far has shared. I mean, from all the conversations that I've had, it is clear that it is long-term flexible funding that allows small organizations to really operate in an environment of trust and sustainability. So, yeah.
Thank you. And finally, Cynthia.
So risk, I would really strongly encourage funders to take risks. There is no greater risk than not funding the organizations that are doing this work, from the grassroots, from the emerging organizations, those really at the core face, to throughout the whole ecosystem. So that, in my view, is the greatest risk. We talk too often about the risk being focused on the financial and is this organization too risky? But the state of the world that we're in, it's a much greater risk to not fund. Be bold. Really be bold. Again, when I talk about being bold in terms of the vision that you have for the work, but also how you do the work, how you make the resources quality resources. We want quantity, but we also want quality resources. And that is what I've been hearing, again, from Chinere. I think this is what we're hearing from Radhika with the podcast. This is certainly the call that Bielta is putting out. So take risks. Be bold. I think if we at Equality Fund can do the kind of flexible long-term funding can have an ecosystem approach where we're trying to commit our funding for at least up to 5 years with our own uncertainties. We're trying to extend as much as possible. If we can take those kinds of risks with government funding, there is no reason why, especially if you're sitting in private philanthropy, you're sitting in sort of small family donor advised fund, you can take the biggest risks and be really, truly bold. And because we have a network and an ecosystem of this range of feminist funds, what if we at Equality Fund cannot fund, Chinera's organization, which was starting out, guess what? There are feminist funds that can do that. And out of the 30 feminist fund partners that we have, and in our conversations with them and in reviewing what they're doing, a significant portion of their work is going to first-time organizations. Okay, so that's really critical. We can fund, we have these different layers, but there is no reason why we're not funding the grassroots, the smallest, the emerging organizations that can grow to do the kind of impact. So take risks, be bold in the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Cynthia. What amazing recommendations and really food for thought. We have many questions on the chat. I think some of the questions have been answered already. We have some questions directly to the Equality Fund. So Cynthia, if you can just drop the link in the chat so colleagues can go directly and learn more about the Equality Fund, that would be great. I think we are roughly over 2 minutes over time, so just going to do some final reflections. As we conclude today's webinar, it is clear that our own organizational resilience has underscored a vital message that the strength of organization in tackling violence against women and girls lies in their resilience and community-driven approaches. As we heard from the panelists, the takeaways from today's discussions highlight the critical importance of trust, flexibility, and long-term commitment from donors. Investing in organizational resilience is not merely about maintaining operations, it's about empowering these organizations to innovate, to adapt, and sustain their critical work in the face of challenges. Let us remember, as many of the panelists said, that behind every organization is a powerful force for change. By fostering an environment of support and collaboration, we can amplify their efforts and collectively advance the global fight against violence. Thank you all for being part of this crucial conversation and for commitment to making a difference. I think that we have some suggestions to keep the Q&A until 9:30. Let me just cross-check with colleagues. Yes, so we are open for questions. Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments. So if you move to the next slide while we receive the questions, we have the QR code to all knowledge products and podcasts behind this work in our screen right now. And we invite you all to read and listen to our grantee voices on the Trust Fund Learning Hub. We know a lot of you and on the call have much to say on this topic of organizational resilience, so please do engage with us on Chime. You can give us your reviews and feedback in over 50 languages on the platform, and the QR code for the Chime discussion is on the screen. We'll continue the series of dialogues. Our next one will be on resource and practice-based knowledge in the month of October, and we will be posting more information on this event on our website and social media. So please stay tuned. Thank you again to everyone for joining and for engaging on the dialogue. Let me see if we have some questions on, let me see. Great, we have some questions on, like I say, on specifically to the Equality Fund. I think we have already shared the link.
Mildred, there's a question on the Caribbean that I'm happy to respond to.
Yes, please go ahead.
So that's the question from Terry in terms of the the Caribbean. So that is a region that Equality Fund and Previous Year's Match has been engaging in for quite a while. It is unfortunately the only region that does not yet have a feminist fund. And that there's major implications to that in terms of availability of resources for grassroots and the sort of continuity of resources. So we also as Equality Fund worked in collaboration with the Estrella Lesbian Fund on the Women's Voice and Leadership Caribbean. So that was a 5-year initiative. It is currently under renewal for hopefully another sort of 6 years, but it was this wonderful opportunity to provide a number of organizations. We had about 28 different partners across a number of countries in the Caribbean that we've been supporting for about 3 to 4 years. And we have, for the Equality Fund, we have now integrated the grantee partners from Women's Voice and Leadership, which was very much a project approach funding. We have integrated them into the core work of Equality Fund, so that allows us to continue supporting them for the foreseeable future. Networking was a critical element of this work, and one of the really exciting initiatives that was undertaken was a feasibility study around to assess the feasibility of establishing a Caribbean fund. Unsurprisingly, it is in fact very feasible. So we are now, undertaking the next steps of how do we go about supporting, facilitating, not for Equality Funds to be setting up a fund in the Caribbean. That will not happen. Our role is very much to facilitate and to support activists and others in the Caribbean towards establishing a Caribbean fund for gender justice. So that is underway. In the meantime, we continue to support the organizations. We are working towards a renewal of Women's Voice and Leadership. Estrella, we also help convene funders that are working in the Caribbean, of which there's a handful. And so, we come together sort of periodically. We are really interested in coming together with these donor collaboratives, with these donors in the Caribbean around, the impact of the hurricanes. Okay, we heard about Beryl, but these are no longer unsurprising. They're getting worse and worse. We talk about climate change. I think we can be a lot more intentional, more sort of forward thinking and planning. So we're trying to, convene also donors in the Caribbean around that. So there is work ongoing, but unfortunately, it is a challenge that we do not have yet a standing, feminist fund that can enable a broader range, a kind of an ecosystem approach, kind of longer term funding in the Caribbean, but that is underway.
Great, thank you so much, Cynthia, for your answer. There's a question about the UN Trust Fund yearly call for proposal and when it's available. So the UN Trust Fund awards grants regularly through an open call and competitive call for proposals. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to just drop the link for the call for proposal information in the chat, so you can all be informed of future funding opportunities. So please, colleagues, just I invite you to just have a review and read about our call for proposal. Let me see. Gemma, do you want to come in on the part 2 that you have recommended? Over to you.
Sure. The 2 questions online. One was about UN Women itself and the perception that, yes, it can seem very bureaucratic in terms of application processes. And then also the other question about stringent donors. You're right. That is the case. And what we're doing is working on a part 2 of this study, which will be very specifically what recommendations can we make now from organizational resilience for donors, including the trust fund, that will dig deeper into these issues of the reality of how to do flexible funding and how to get around the stringency. One thing to remember is that we're all, unfortunately, in this ecosystem together. So the UN Trust Fund also has donors, and many of the feminist funds also have donors. So we're all in this world of needing to respond to our own donors, including taxpayers in many countries. So how do we make the case that flexible funding and less stringency is the way to go? Well, conversations like today help. So documenting the evidence that we've seen today that trusting civil society and providing more flexible funding and supporting staff leads to results and leads to more sustainable and adaptable movements, irrespective of the pushback and the enormous challenges which they face every day. So we endeavor in the Trust Fund to document that knowledge with your help, with your insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gemma. There are some questions about the slides, about the presentation. We will be sharing the presentation and the slides after the webinar. So yes, please stay tuned. We are also tweeting live, and please engage with us in Chime. And you are all welcome, of course, to provide your comments on the organizational resilience paper on Chime. They will be really grateful to hear from you. Let me see if there are more questions. Great. I think we are having a really amazing engagement online. I'm just reviewing some of the questions right now. Great. I think we have covered all of the questions. So if there are no more questions, and I invite you to just share with us your insights, more questions on the chat. If not, we are actually early. Thank you so much for your engagement. Please do engage with us through Shine. Engage with us reading our knowledge products. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you to the panelists for sharing your experience, your insights, your recommendations, and really building this ecosystem together to improve the way we operate, we adapt, and in general, to end violence against women and girls. Thank you so much for your engagement.
Hi, Mildred. We do have a hand up from Maria.
Great. Sorry, Maria, I don't see your hand up, but please come in. If colleagues can help me to unmute Maria, please. I think she's muted.
Bom dia. Eu sou aqui de São Paulo, Brasil. Mas a organização que eu faço parte atua em 22 estados da Federação Brasileira. E a gente vem fazendo um trabalho de base de fortalecimento das lideranças, as lideranças de base. E gostaria de saber como faz para buscar apoio para projeto, para continuar no fortalecimento, as mulheres atuando na construção e na produção de moradias populares.
Obrigado, Maria. We are going to share.
Gracias, querida.
Obrigado. We're going to share information about the UN Trust Fund funding through the chat, so you can read more about our call for proposal. Also, Cynthia shared the link to Quality Fund, so you can also read more about it. And please do not hesitate to contact us also through Chime, where we can support you and guide you better on this process, just so you can learn more about both funds. I think we have 2 more colleagues, if I'm not mistaken. Perhaps Marlene, do you want to come in? and we have 5 more minutes.
Sí, soy Marlene Aide Rodríguez, soy nicaragüense, soy la presidenta de una organización de base de cooperativas y trabajo con la Comisión Guairo a nivel de la región de América Latina. Yo había puesto varios mensajes en el chat y precisamente nosotras como mujeres de base hemos venido trabajando el tema de la resiliencia en los 3 niveles, en el antes, el durante y el después, y luchamos hacia la sostenibilidad y sabemos que la resiliencia es el camino para hacer cambio en nuestras comunidades a nivel personal. Entonces mi pregunta es que si hay posibilidades de obtener fondos para organizaciones de base de América Latina, específicamente en América Central y América del Sur hemos tenido sufrido la parte de los fenómenos naturales que hemos venido saliendo, y es con la resiliencia que nosotros hemos venido trabajando y apoyándonos, porque no solamente estamos hablando de crisis, también tenemos crisis política, pero también nosotros tenemos que buscar como agricultoras, tenemos que tener el alimento, ¿verdad? Porque estamos viendo que también trabajamos el tema de los cuidados para las personas y también cuidamos nuestros suelos. Entonces, y sabemos pues que con este fondo nos puede apoyar porque son muchas organizaciones las que estamos necesitando este fondo en América Latina. ¿Y cómo hacemos nosotros para poder acceder? Solamente. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias, Marlene. Efectivamente, nosotros, el Fondo Fiduciario, tiene, bueno, hemos apoyado organizaciones a nivel mundial y también en Latinoamérica en el tema de resiliencia organizativa, y estoy contenta de escuchar de que ustedes tienen ya un trabajo avanzado en Nicaragua sobre la resiliencia al antes, y durante y después en las operaciones de las organizaciones. Y sí, solamente confirmar que sí, nosotros trabajamos en esta área y hacemos llamados a propuestas todos los años. Y de nuevo, mis colegas van a poner el link abajo para que ustedes puedan leer acerca de cómo funciona el llamado de propuestas del Fondo Fiduciario y cuáles son los ciclos, ¿no?, de los llamados a propuestas. Así que les invito a que lean acerca del Fondo Fiduciario, de los ciclos de llamados a propuestas, y también hemos compartido el link de Quality Fund para que también puedan leer. Así que solo confirmarle que sí, nosotros financiamos a las organizaciones en esta área. Muchas gracias por su intervención.
Hello, very quickly, thanks much for the presentation. Really good presentation on resilience. I was wondering if you can touch a little bit more on where you mention empathy within organizations, as well as some of the issues that are around resilience is coming directly from other organizations. If you could touch a little bit more briefly on those 2 areas, thank you.
Great, thank you. Gemma, would you like to take that on, please? Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry, I didn't catch the full question. Could you repeat the question?
Matia,
yes, of course. Yes, of course. So the first presenter, really good presentations, all of it. It touched a bit on one of the really solid points, was that one of the concerns around organization resilience, or I think one of the findings, was that it's sort of the approach between organization to organization, sort of. I think I might be limited in my understanding of that particular findings, but it's the very first point I think that was made. And then a second point was around showing empathy within organizations. And I wonder if you could have elaborated a little bit more on those 2 points.
One of the things we found in the literature review as we prepared for the study was that some feminists and activists in general have been criticizing the term resilience because it can raise expectations that people are expected to be resilient. We've seen that in Gaza most recently, that there's this horrendous expectation that people can survive and activists can survive throughout the worst circumstances. And that's quite pertinent today. I think it's today that's the International Day of Humanitarian Aid Workers. And we see every day that humanitarian aid workers and activists are really at the front lines and putting their lives at risk. And this can be praised, by donors as, oh, wow, amazing, aren't you resilient? But the reality is that we shouldn't ever expect anyone to have to put their life on the line for their job. And that in all these places, it's the state responsibility, according to international human rights law, and the world's responsibility to respond to disasters and support people and communities. And I think when we're talking about empathy between organizations, that's where the reliance on each other comes out so strongly. We heard a lot in the conversation the word solidarity, and in the absence sometimes of the feeling of solidarity from those who should be responsible, we have a sense of solidarity between the women's organizations, the disabled people's organizations, the people who represent the communities and the constituents coming together to fill those gaps. But ultimately, it's our responsibility and our job, especially those who have the stage, to elevate the voice of those who are on the ground, responding to these crises every day, and say this isn't on. It shouldn't be right that people have to be resilient to this extent. So that's the feeling I get. I hope that was the right response and answered your question, and you'll see more in the paper. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Gemma.
you.
Thank you, Gemma. And again, we share the link to the paper on the chat, and we really welcome your thoughts, your reactions through our Shine platform. So colleagues, I really invite you to read that paper that really captures this body of work. Thank you so much to all panelists, presenters, and to all organizations who participated today. Thank you so much for your reflections. I think we are about to end. Any additional questions, we are really happy to engage with you through Shine. Have a good day, colleagues, and I hope that this webinar was useful and insightful to all of you. Thank you. Gracias. Obrigado. Merci.